Fellowship Farm.
Book 6, Crisis and Victory. Leezah, Skye-Maree and Olingah are sad to see their cousins leave after a lovely holiday together. They decide to occupy themselves with making a treehouse in the orchard. But before they can do that, disaster strikes, and they must draw on the power of their love for each other and trust in God to turn the crisis into victory. Chapter 1, Home Again. Flip Fitzgerald's large hands gripped the steering wheel as he drove the orange ute carefully along the sandy track away from the campsite. The windows of the ute were all open and letting in the summer breeze, which was fortunate because the 5 children and 2 adults in the ute had not had a shower for 3 days. Romy Fitzgerald rested her elbow on the window, and the breeze blew stray strands of frizzy dark hair around her tanned face and into her brown eyes. Her other arm was wrapped around her 8-year-old daughter Skye-Maree, whose own head of frizz leaned comfortably against her mother. Skye's 10-year-old sister Leezah and 6-year-old brother Olingah sat in the back with their 2 cousins Nick and Anissa. Nick, who was the eldest of the 5, was 11, and his little sister, the youngest of the group, was just a month younger than Olingah. Nick and Anissa had come from Sydney to spend 2 weeks on their cousin's farm in Tasmania. As they bumped along the rough sandy track, the children chatted and laughed about the time they had just spent camping at Choppy's Point. And while they chatted, the Fitzgerald family puppies, Flea, Flex and Fizz, clambered all over the back seat and all over the legs of the children in the back, trying to get their noses out the window to catch some of the breeze. Soon the ute had left the sandy track behind and was on a solid dirt road. As they drove along the road, avoiding potholes and the occasional dead possum or wallaby, they passed bush and scrub. Soon the bush and scrub gave way to fenced-off paddocks. Some of them were irrigated and green. Some of the paddocks had tall, dry grass growing in them. These were the hay paddocks. After they returned from this camping trip, the haymaking would begin. They passed large paddocks full of sheep and others with cows until they arrived at the blue gate of Fellowship Farm. On the left of the long, straight stretch of road was Fellowship Farm's shearing shed, but the family in the ute swung right and pulled up in front of the white weatherboard farmhouse with its dilapidated garden fence and its disorderly garden full of fruit trees, long grass, weeds, and a wild array of flowers. The children piled out, some with bare sandy feet, some in gumboots. "Gumboots on, please," called Romy to her children, niece and nephew. Even though the walk from the car to the back of the house was only a few meters, Romy wasn't taking any chances. The summer sun brought out the snakes, and the warm stones of the path, surrounded by the long grass, were perfect places for snakes to stretch out and warm themselves. The children put on their sandy gumboots and helped unload the ute. Soon the washing line on the back lawn beside the doghouse was draped with airing sleeping bags, and the lawn itself was strewn with eskies, buckets, spades, swimming costumes, and other things being hosed clean. The puppies thought it most wonderful and ran madly around the large fenced-in backyard, stealing spades, swimmers, esky lids, whatever their little 14-week-old mouths could manage to drag away. By the time everything had been hosed down, hung out to dry, put away, and, where necessary, rescued from the puppies, it was nearly lunchtime. Normally, the Fitzgerald family ate together at the kitchen table. But with Nick and Anissa visiting, there were too many to eat there. So Romy and Nick set the table in the living room, and soon the chattering subsided for a few brief moments as they concentrated on the sandwiches and fruit that Flip and Anissa had prepared. For 3 whole days, the children had run on the beaches, swum, built dams and sandcastles, dug holes big enough to live in, collected shells, searched rock pools for crabs, gathered firewood, cooked all their food over an open fire, washed their dishes using sand at the edge of the sea, slept on the ground in tents, found a pirate's cave with buried treasure in it, and so much more. Now that they had time to rest and reflect on their camping trip, they felt very happy and very tired. After lunch, the children helped to clear the table and wash the dishes. No one had energy to run around outside. Flip suggested everyone have a nap. But it was nearly the last day of the cousins' visit, and no one wanted to waste it sleeping. So they decided to play Uno. Leezah got the cards out of the game cupboard, while Nick and Skye scattered the cushions from the living room and sunroom couches on the floor of the sunroom. The children lay on their cushions in a circle, facing inward, while Olingah dealt the cards. The sun streamed in through the glass roof of the sunroom, drying the children's freshly washed hair and making them feel very sleepy. After 2 rounds of Uno, the youngest players, Ollie and Anissa, were fast asleep on their cushions. And it was only a matter of minutes before the older children decided to stop playing and just rest for a few minutes on their pillows. And so it was that their last free afternoon together was indeed wasted on a nap. As the sun set over Fellowship Farm, Leezah woke from her nap. Her throat was dry and her tongue felt sticky. She pushed herself up off the floor and wandered out to the kitchen. Flip was still out on the farm, checking that everything was okay after their time away. Romy was putting out the last load of washing and bringing in the first one, which was already dry. "Mum," said Leezah as she poured herself a big glass of water, "when is Auntie Jen arriving?" Anissa and Nick's parents, Jennifer and Camille, were flying down from Sydney that afternoon. They were renting a car and driving to Fellowship Farm. Auntie Jen and Uncle Camille were going to spend 2 nights at the farm and then take Anissa and Nick back to Sydney. "Soon, I think, darling," replied her mum, tipping the washing onto the living room table. Just then, Leezah heard the sound of 2 cars. One was coming up the road from the town and slowing to turn in at the gate. The other was Flip's ute coming down the hill from the shed. "They're here!" shouted Leezah. She ran back to the sunroom. The other children were starting to wake up. Their faces were marked with the patterns of the cushions, and they felt hot and thirsty too. "They're here!" shouted Leezah again, disturbing Skye, who was just waking. "Grrr," said Skye, reaching for a cushion. She used it to swipe at her sister's ankle. But Nick and Anissa hurried to get up. Through the sunroom window, they could see their parents getting out of the car in front of the house. The front door of the house was always kept bolted, so the children hurried up the hall, through the living room and kitchen, then out the back door. They looked for their gumboots in the dim boot room and pulled them on to go out the side path to the front gate. But by the time they had done so, their parents were already at the back veranda. Soon Jen and Camille were covered in hugging children, all trying to talk at once about the adventures of the past 2 weeks. And the stories continued for the next 2 days and nights, until, at Sunday lunchtime, suitcases were taken out to the car and the families hugged and cried and teased and laughed one last time. Nick and Anissa's eyes brimmed with tears as they climbed into the back seat of the car, rolled down the windows and waved goodbye to their beloved cousins, Auntie and Uncle. Auntie Jen honked out a tune on the horn of the car as she pulled the small white sedan away from the house, through the blue gate of the farm, and turned down the dirt road towards Kellyton. What are we going to do without them? Wailed Ollie as they walked slowly back inside the house. Flea, Flex and Fizz danced around their feet, licking and nipping their ankles, as if to say, "Don't worry, you can play with us." As it turned out, however, Ollie would not be able to play with Flea, Flex and Fizz. Indeed, Ollie would not be able to play with anyone. Chapter 2: A Treehouse Plan. With their cousins gone, all the activities that used to be so fun suddenly seemed dull. On the day after they left, after prayers, breakfast and morning chores, Leezah, Skye and Ollie wandered up to one of their favourite places on the farm, the old apple orchard. They had a few swings on the rope and tried playing hide and seek. But even with the excited puppies tumbling over each other in the long grass of the orchard, no one really felt like playing their usual games. Leezah climbed one of the apple trees and sat up at the top of the tree pulling at the little dry twigs that grew out of the bigger branches. Leezah was happy to find that the tree was perfect for sitting in. The branches stretched out to the side in different directions, leaving some empty space in the middle of the tree. Suddenly, Leezah called out, "Hey, Skye! Ollie, come up here! I've just had the best idea!" Skye and Olingah pulled themselves up to where Leezah was sitting in the old apple tree. "Look!" said Leezah as their heads reached the branch on which Leezah's bottom was resting. Skye and Olingah looked. They saw an apple tree. They looked at each other. "Cuckoo?" suggested Skye to Ollie. Then turning to Leezah, she said, "It's a tree, sister. Great idea." Skye opened her eyes wide and stared at her sister, teasing her. "Don't you see?" exclaimed Leezah. "This is the perfect tree for a treehouse." Skye and Olingah looked again, and this time they saw what Leezah saw. The branches spreading out, making a perfect base for the floor of a treehouse, with enough free space upwards to add walls and a roof. "You're right," said Skye, starting to get her old excitement back. "We can make the treehouse here and have a wooden ladder going down the tree trunk," said Olingah. "Perfect," said Skye and Leezah together. The children hurried down the tree. They would need to get some supplies and some help from Romy and Flip. They hurried through the long grass of the neglected orchard and climbed over the gate. They ran down the long hill of the hill paddock until they got to the makeshift bridge at the bottom where they could cross the stream. A few minutes later, they were pulling off their boots and entering the kitchen. Romy and Flip were still out on the farm. But they would be in for lunch soon, and in the afternoon, Romy would be going into the clinic where she worked as a vet. The children washed their hands and started to make some lunch. Skye and Olingah made a salad, while Leezah cut some cheese and made grilled cheese sandwiches with the sandwich maker. By the time Romy and Flip arrived, the table was set and the lunch was made. "Oh my goodness!" exclaimed Romy as she came into the kitchen. "Flip, come quickly!" Flip was washing his hands at the outside toilet when Romy called. He hurried into the kitchen behind her. "Some angels have come and made lunch," Romy continued. She turned to the children. "Did you see them? Did they have beautiful wings? Why didn't you catch one so we could have our very own permanent angel at Fellowship Farm?" she asked. "We tried, Mum," sighed Skye dramatically. "But it struggled and struggled, so in the end we just had to let it go." "Oh well, at least we've got one free lunch out of the angel before it got away," said Flip as he grabbed Skye and Leezah both in his famous rib crusher hug. While the family ate their lunch, the children asked Romy and Flip if they could build a treehouse. Romy and Flip both thought it was a great idea. Flip thought it would be best to make a really good treehouse that they could really enjoy and that would be safe. but that would take some time to build. How about you three come help me with the hay this afternoon, and then I'll have some time free at the end of the day to start working on the treehouse with you. The children agreed. After lunch, the children put on their sunscreen and hats, as well as their long rubber boots. Even in the heat of the summer, the children always wore gumboots. All the snakes in Tasmania were poisonous, and it was not worth the risk to wear cooler shoes. Especially out in the hay paddocks, where the grass was so long and made the perfect hiding place for snakes. Romy changed her clothes and grabbed her vet bag. As she climbed into the orange ute, she called out, "Bye, lovies! I'll be home around 5. The Fitzgeralds all knew that truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues. In fact, Ollie had made it into a beautifully decorated poster which was on their fridge door. So Romy didn't mean to say something untrue. But as it turned out, Romy would not be home around 5. Chapter 3: Snake! Flip drove the tractor dragging the baler up and down the huge hay paddock. It scooped up the cut hay, pressed the hay into the bale and wrapped it in string before spitting it back out. The farmhand drove the ute slowly along the rows of hay bales, pulling a machine that scooped the bales up and moved them up a ramp before dropping them over the side of the ute. Leezah's job was to make sure the bales were straight so that they could be easily collected by the machine and move smoothly up the ramp. Olingah and Skye received the bales that fell on the back of the ute. They shifted them into position on the ute so that the bales were neatly stacked. When the ute was full, they all drove to the hay barn and unloaded the bales, stacking them into neat layers in the huge shed. It was heavy work. The children's arms and backs ached from shifting the heavy bales. Their skin got scratched by the hay, and their hands were rubbed by the string which they had to grab to shift the bales. The dust from the cut hay got in their eyes, and the sun was bright and hot. After about an hour, Olingah jumped off the back of the ute and wandered down to the creek at the bottom of the paddock, leaving Skye-Maree to stack the bales on the back of the ute by herself for a few minutes. He slipped off his gumboots and waded in the cold water. On the other side of the creek, he saw a couple of small green frogs. Olingah squished through the mud at the bottom of the creek to get closer to the frogs. The soft, slimy mud felt good on his hot, sweaty feet. Just as he got close, the frogs jumped into the long reeds beside the creek. Olingah stepped in to follow. It was then that he felt a burning pain in his ankle. He cried out and looked down to see a large black snake slither rapidly across the creek and into the grass on the other side. Suddenly, the pain in his leg paled in comparison to the terror in his heart. The black snake was deadly poisonous. Olingah clutched his ankle and screamed. His body began to shake and tears streamed down his face. Leezah, who was straightening the bales, was the furthest away from the noise of the vehicle engines and the closest to the creek where Olingah had been wading. Leezah knew Ollie's cries. There was a cry to get attention, a cry that said he was offended, and a cry of genuine distress. The scream she heard now felt like knives piercing her heart. She leaped up and ran towards the creek. Ollie was panicking now and screaming, "Snake! Snake! Snake!" as he clutched his ankle. Leezah quickly checked that Olingah was not in further danger. Then, turning, she fled back up to where her father was turning the tractor to go back down the field. He was wearing earphones to protect his ears from the roar of the engine, and Leezah's frantic yelling could not penetrate. Slipping in the freshly cut hay and clumsy in her gumboots, she forced herself to catch up to the tractor. Waving her arms and signalling for Flip to stop, Leezah ran in front of the tractor and into Flip's line of vision. Flip stopped the engine. He flung off his earphones and stepped angrily out of the cabin. His children had grown up on the farm. They knew the danger of running in front of tractors or other farm machinery. He was shocked at the behavior of his eldest daughter. "What are you doing?" he started to say, stepping down from the tractor. But the distress in Leezah's face stopped his words even before she spoke. Leezah pointed to the creek at the bottom of the paddock where Olingah sat sobbing and terrified. Leezah just managed to catch enough breath to gasp, "Snake bite!" There was no time and no need for any more words. Flip gently pushed his daughter in the direction of the creek while he himself turned and ran in the opposite direction. Leezah sucked in a lungful of air and flew back down the hill to Olingah. She took his t-shirt off and immediately began to wrap the bitten leg tightly with the shirt to stop the spread of the poison. Within minutes, Flip had unhooked the bale collector from the side of the ute and was tearing down the paddock to the creek. Every minute counted now. As soon as Olingah was in the ute, Flip sped across the paddock and out the gate. He raced up the dirt road toward the farmhouse, stopping briefly at the gate to let the farmhand and Leezah off the back of the ute. Skye stayed with Olingah in the ute. Flip tore away from the gate and went roaring down the road towards the town. Kellyton had no hospital, and the nearest town with a hospital was a 20-minute drive away. As Flip tore through the town at twice the speed limit, people looked up in surprise. People in the town had known Flip for 20 years, ever since he came to work on what used to be Romy's parents' farm, and they had never ever seen him driving so irresponsibly. Sweat poured down Flip's face. Olingah was starting to lose consciousness, and his body was shaking with small spasms. Skye held her brother close, closed her eyes and prayed with all her heart for God's assistance. Meanwhile, at the farm, Leezah had contacted the hospital, described the snake that Olingah had seen, and described Flip's ute. The hospital dispatched an ambulance to meet Flip on the road between Kellyton and the hospital. Flip was almost halfway there when the flashing lights and wailing siren appeared ahead. Flip pulled the car over. The sound of the siren made Skye's heart tremble. Quickly and efficiently, the ambulance staff transferred Olingah to the ambulance and began to attend to him. The ambulance doors closed and the ambulance raced ahead to the hospital. Chapter 4: Fears and Prayers. As the ambulance raced into the distance and out of sight around the bend in the road, Flip and Skye followed more slowly. Skye picked up the ute radio. "Mobile 1 to base." Instantly there came a reply. "Base to Mobile 1. Ollie is now in the ambulance, over." "Where are you now?" "Over," asked Leezah, and they could hear that she had been crying. "We're about 10 minutes from the hospital, over." "I've contacted Mum. She's on her way home now. We'll meet you at the hospital, over." "Okay, over and out." Skye hung the radio back on its hook. Flip's thin face was tense. His head pounded and his eyes were red. Skye reached over and rubbed his arm. He held her hand for a few seconds. Soon they arrived at the small 2-story hospital on the hilltop. The glass doors at the front opened as they approached. Flip and Skye walked quickly up to reception. "Hello, Flip," said Reg, the large red-headed receptionist with a cheerful grin. Flip could not manage to return the grin, but he responded courteously before inquiring about Olingah's whereabouts. "Olingah's still in emergency, Flip," replied Reg. "Why don't you take a seat right here and the doctors will let you know when you can go see him," he suggested. Flip and Skye could not sit. Instead, holding hands, they walked back out through the sliding doors to wait for Romy and Leezah. They didn't go far from the entrance, in case one of the hospital staff came to look for them. From the front of the hospital, Flip and Skye could see the road from Kellyton, winding through the valley and up the hill. Skye spotted Romy's orange ute first. Soon, Romy and Leezah pulled into the parking lot in front of the hospital and hurried across to where Flip and Skye stood at the top of the steps. "Any news?" Romy asked, slipping her keys into her bag. "He's still in emergency," Flip replied. He put his arm lovingly around his wife's shoulders. Romy slipped her arm around Flip's waist, and the four of them went back into the waiting area. Minutes passed. Each one felt like an hour to the anxious family. However, it was not long before a nurse came out to give them some news on Olingah's condition. She said that the anti-venom had been administered. The doctors still had some concerns about Olingah's condition, but were monitoring him closely. But she said that the family could come and visit Olingah. As they went into the room where Olingah was being treated, they didn't know what to expect. When they saw him, so fragile and small-looking, lying in the white bed against the wall, in the room full of other emergency patients, their hearts ached, and the tears that had been kept until then started to fall. His brown face was pale. His hair was a matted, sweaty mess. His eyes were closed and an oxygen mask was over his nose and mouth. A tube came out of both arms, connecting him to hanging plastic bags full of clear fluid. The doctor approached them to answer questions and explain the treatment and Olingah's response to the treatment. She was kind and patient, but no one could manage to speak much. When the doctor moved on to the next patient, Romy, dabbing her eyes, suggested some prayers. Flip and Skye sat on 2 plastic stools by the bed. Romy propped herself on the foot of the bed. Leezah stood on the other side, hands together and eyes gently closed. Leezah turned with all her heart to Abdul-Baha. She let the hospital, the sick patients, the nurses and doctors pass from her mind. Tenderly, she began to sing, "Thy name is my healing, O my God, and remembrance of thee is my remedy. Nearness to thee is my hope, and love for thee is my companion. Thy mercy to me is my healing, and my succor in both this world and the world to come. Thou verily art the all-bountiful, the all-knowing, the all-wise." Each of them said a prayer in turn. When Skye had finished the last prayer, Leezah remained standing with her eyes closed, reciting the greatest name, Allah-Pa, silently to herself. When Leezah opened her eyes, the light and sound of the busy hospital room flooded back into her consciousness. Romy and Flip went to talk to one of the nurses. Then they consulted quickly between themselves before coming back to Olingah's bedside. "Daddy's going to stay at the hospital tonight with Olingah," said Romy to the girls. Romy's eyes were red and she looked very tired, as did Flip. "We 3 will go home now." As she spoke, Romy reached into her purse for her mobile phone. She handed it to Flip. Flip took the phone and gave Romy a kiss and a hug. Leezah and Skye kissed their brother and hugged their dad and walked slowly out of the room behind their mother. As they left, a nurse followed them out and tapped Leezah on the shoulder. "Excuse me," she said. "May I speak with you a moment?" Chapter 5, Curiosity, Cards and Courage. Leezah was surprised that the nurse wanted to talk to her rather than her mother. She looked up at her. Green eyes sparkled out of a plump brown face. As the nurse began to speak, Leezah noticed a small gold nose stud. The nurse spoke with an accent that Leezah thought sounded musical. The nurse spoke very respectfully to Leezah. "I'm sorry to bother you at such a difficult time," she apologized. "My name is Sangeeta." Sangeeta offered a small, warm hand to Leezah, which Leezah shook firmly. "I'm sorry to bother you," she apologized again. "But could I ask you a question?" Leezah smiled courteously. "Of course, Sangeeta. My name is Leezah." To Leezah's surprise, the nurse asked, "Leezah, please can I know, what is your religion?" "My religion?" asked Leezah. "I am a Baha'i." "Oh, Baha'i," said the nurse. Her face showed that she had heard the word before. Leezah was just wondering why the nurse had stopped her to ask such a strange question, when Sangeeta explained, "I saw you praying for your brother," she said. "I have never seen a child pray so sincerely, so beautifully. I would like to know more about Baha'i. I would like to know where you learned to pray like that. I have a little girl. She's only 2, but I want her to learn to really pray with all her heart like that." Leezah smiled at Sangeeta. She felt a little embarrassed, but she was also very happy. Leezah glanced over to her mother and sister who were waiting outside the sliding glass doors. Skye was glaring at her impatiently. Sangeeta, we will be back tomorrow. How about I bring you something to read and we can talk some more?" "Oh, thank you. Wonderful, thank you. I will look forward very much. Goodbye, Leezah." In the car, Leezah told Skye and Romy about Sangeeta's question. Her mother was very pleased. She suggested inviting Sangeeta to their monthly fireside. "Her voice was like music," said Leezah. "I think Sangeeta probably comes originally from India," explained her mother. "If she is Indian, she has probably heard of the Lotus Temple in New Delhi. You can ask her tomorrow." By the time they had arrived at Fellowship Farm, it was almost dinner time. The farmhand had attended to the afternoon chores for them, so Leezah just needed to lock up the hens. Romy and Skye made some spaghetti and salad, and the 3 of them sat up to eat. It felt so strange to just be the 3 of them, and their hearts were heavy. After dinner, Leezah and Skye washed up. Romy called Flip on the mobile. When she hung up, she shared the news with her daughters that Olingah was in a stable condition, but he was still not able to sit up or eat. He had been moved into the children's ward, and the nurses had provided Flip with a low bed on wheels next to Olingah's. The girls spent the evening making beautiful cards for Ollie. Leezah made a big yellow card. She painted Flea, Flex and Fizz, using glitter glue for their eyes and teeth and claws. She glued some pieces of real ribbon onto the card around the puppies' necks. And then, using a stencil, she wrote on the front, "Don't be sick, just be jolly. Hurry up and get well, Ollie." Inside the card, Leezah copied a part of a prayer for healing from her prayer book. Ollie would not be able to read all the words, but perhaps Nurse Sangeeta could help him. "O God, my God, I beg of thee by the ocean of thy healing, to purge me with the waters of thy bounty from every affliction and disorder, and from all weakness and feebleness." All around the words, Leezah stuck butterfly stickers. The card took a long time to make, but it looked beautiful. Skye-Maree's card was beautiful too. It was coloured in different coloured hearts with Ollie written in each one. When the girls had finished their cards, they packed away their craft supplies. Then they took their cards to show their mummy. "Wow!" exclaimed Romy. "What great cards! They make me want to get sick too, so I can get such beautiful cards. You two girls can put a sticker each on the virtues poster next to creativity and also responsibility for cleaning up your craft supplies without being asked. Great stuff, girls." Just before prayers in bed, Leezah got a magazine out of the Fitzgerald Baha'i supplies cupboard. She also got a small book of prayers. She put them on the kitchen table so that she would be sure to remember to take them for Sangeeta tomorrow. Romy reached for the guitar and the three of them sat up for evening prayers. There was no fidgeting that night. All three of them turned their hearts to Abdul-Baha and prayed with all their soul. "Please let Ollie get better," Skye prayed. "Please let us have the strength to accept your will," prayed Romy. After prayers, Romy plaited Leezah's long dark hair as usual, and the girls went off to their bed. Leezah climbed up to the top bunk. Skye lay on the bottom bunk without getting under the covers. They were tired, but sleep did not come easily. And so, at 10 o'clock when Romy turned on the outside lights, locked the doors and went to bed, she was soon joined by two big girls. "Can we have a snuggle?" said Skye. "We can't sleep." Romy patted her bed and pulled back the sheet. "Come here, my lovies." Comforted by being snuggled up against their mother, the girls fell into a deep sleep. Chapter 6, Healing and Healing. For the pigs, dogs, chickens and pigeons, the next day was just another ordinary day. And so, although Leezah and Skye wanted to leave for the hospital as quickly as possible, they had to attend to their morning chores first. Although it was faster if they divided the chores, this was one day that neither of them wanted to be alone, so they took the time to do them together. As soon as they had finished, they changed out of their farm clothes and brushed their hair. Skye collected the cards that they made for Olingah from the dining table, where they had left them so that the glue could dry. Leezah grabbed the literature she had prepared for the nurse and the bag of pyjamas and underwear for Ollie. They met Romy at the gate as she brought the ute down from the shed. As they drove along the road, the warm summer breeze carried the smell of cut hay. When they reached the township, Romy paused briefly at the surgery to leave a note for her clients and receptionist. They also stopped at the bakery to get some fresh rolls and a small carton of milk for Flip. Then they headed for the hospital. When they arrived at the hospital, they were directed to the children's ward. As they climbed the stairs to the second floor, each of them wondered how Olingah would be this morning. Romy had tried to call Flip on the mobile, but had not been able to get through. Flip sat in a chair by Olingah's bed. His blue eyes were ringed with dark shadows. Little brown bristles stuck out all over his chin and lip. His short hair was sticking on end, and his dirty farm shirt looked even more crumpled than usual. But the smile on his weary face told them instantly that everything was going to be okay. Indeed, behind Flip, Olingah sat up in his bed, enjoying his specially delivered breakfast, served on a wheeled table. "Mummy!" he grinned. Romy hugged his head to her chest. "Look, Leezah! Look, Skye!" he gloated. "I have eggs and bacon for breakfast. And chocolate milk!" "Ollie's back to normal!" laughed Skye-Maree. Romy went around the bed to where Flip was sitting. "How was your night, darling?" she asked, kissing him on his scratchy cheek. Flip rolled his eyes and then crossed them. "Great," he said, grinning a wobbly grin. "We're just waiting for the doctor now. The nurses think he'll be in one more night for observation and home tomorrow." "Wonderful, wonderful," Rommy's words were choked by tears of relief. Ya Baha'u'llah, she murmured. We made you some cards, Ollie, said Skye, presenting the 2 large cards to her brother. Oh, thanks, said Ollie. They're great. Here, have some of my chocolate milk. Skye helped Ollie with his chocolate milk, while Flip and Rommy chatted about Olingah. I'll be back in a minute, whispered Leezah to Rommy, not wanting to interrupt their conversation. Okay, doll, said Rommy. Leezah clutched the magazine and prayer book. She wondered if someone might stop her going to emergency to look for Nurse Sangeeta. But when she arrived at the first door and poked her head through the door, she saw that it was relatively quiet. Nurse Sangeeta was sitting at the desk. She looked up as Leezah approached. Her face broke into a huge smile. Ah, Leezah, you didn't forget me. Sangeeta took Leezah back out to the waiting room and sat with her on one of the couches. Seeing the literature that Leezah was carrying, she exclaimed, Ah, marvellous! Is this for me? Marvellous, thank you. Leezah called on Abdul-Baha to help her, and then she began to talk to Sangeeta. She talked about the oneness of God, the oneness of all religion, and the oneness of humanity, using the quotes that she had learnt at children's classes. Sangeeta had never heard a child speak in such a way. She was astounded, and it made her even thirstier for knowledge about Baha'u'llah and his faith. Leezah invited Sangeeta to come to the Fitzgerald fireside on the 10th of January. You can bring your little girl if you like, Leezah added. Sangeeta nodded enthusiastically. She wrote down the time and date of the fireside, the phone number, and directions to Fellowship Farm in a little notepad that she kept in her uniform pocket. She also wrote down her own phone number and ripped the page out of her notebook to give it to Leezah. On top of each piece of paper was a picture of 2 little kittens playing with some wool. Oh, I love your notepaper, Leezah said. Thank you for the phone number. Thank you, Leezah, smiled Sangeeta. I will read these carefully. Leezah walked slowly back up the stairs to her family. On each step, she said to herself, Allah Pa. Her heart was full of the joy of teaching. As she arrived in Olingah's room, the breakfast dishes were being cleared away. Olingah was leaning back on his pillows resting, but he looked much better. I know why you got bitten by the snake, said Leezah, pushing herself up on the end of the bed. I know, Leezah, interrupted Olingah. Because I wasn't wearing gumboots. You don't need to tell me. Oh, said Leezah, surprised. Well, yes, I guess so. But what I meant was, I know why you needed to get bitten by the snake. Now everyone else was surprised. You needed to get bitten by the snake so that we could come to the hospital and meet Nurse Sangeeta. She's coming to our fireside next week. Rommy reached out and squeezed her daughter's hand. Hey, Leezah May! That's wonderful! Chapter 7, A Visit to the Temple. It was Rommy who spent the night with Olingah on the second night, and Rommy who brought him home on Wednesday morning when the doctors said he was well enough to leave. As they drove through the gates of the farm, they saw 2 giant gumboots made of yellow card hanging on the fence. In black crayon, Olingah's sisters had written, Welcome home, Ollie. The gumboots were still hanging on the fence on Friday evening when the guests arrived for the fireside. Auntie Ray, from the neighbouring community, always supported the Fitzgerald fireside, and sometimes she brought a friend. And this week, there were 2 others, the Kellyton librarian and one of Rommy's clients. When they began the fireside at 7 o'clock, Sangeeta had still not arrived. Leezah, Skye and Olingah felt very disappointed. They had prepared a special presentation for the fireside. They started the fireside with some prayers. And then Romy asked the children to present what they had prepared. The children didn't feel like doing their presentation without Sangeeta there to see it, but they couldn't wait any longer. Skye turned on the tape recorder. A beautiful song about the Indian Baha'i temple started to play, and the children sang along with the tape. Sing to the jewel in the lotus. Sing to the glory of God. Sing for the earth is one country. Sing. When the song was finished, the children pretended that they were going to visit the temple. They acted out putting on their best clothes and washing their hands and face. And while they dressed, they talked to each other. "What a beautiful dress, Skye," said Olingah. "Thank you, Olingah. I'm wearing this because I am going to the house of worship. We should always be spotless when we go to any house of worship, whether it is a Baha'i temple, a Christian church, a Muslim mosque, a Jewish synagogue, or any other place where people praise God." "Yes, Skye, I know. We need to show respect to God and all His prophets." The children continued their skit, going into the imaginary temple, showing and singing a short prayer. When they came out of the temple, they talked about what they had seen. "I love going to the Baha'i temple," said Leezah, "because it is so simple inside, with no pictures or icons." "Yes, just the greatest name up on the ceiling. What does it mean again?" asked Skye. "The greatest name, or Ya Baha'u'llah, means O thou glory of glories. It is a reference to Baha'u'llah and means that he is the supreme manifestation of God. It is a symbol of the Baha'i faith." "Let's walk around the temple and look at its 9 sides," pretended Olingah. The children walked around the living room table. "Why does it have 9 sides?" asked Leezah. "Because," explained Skye, 9 is the number of perfection and unity. It is the highest single number. When I see all these doors going into the temple, it reminds me that there are lots of roads to God, lots of religions, but they all go to one place, one God." When the children finished their skit, they held up pictures of each of the temples. They used the temples to talk about unity in diversity. All the temples have things in common, but they are all different and are made to fit in with their culture and environment. After the pictures, the children passed out little cards that they had prepared. Then Skye asked one of the guests to read the passage aloud. "A few souls gathered together in a beloved meeting with the feelings of the kingdom, with the divine attractions, with pure hearts and with absolute purity and holiness, to consort in spirit and fragrance. That gathering will have its effect upon all the world." Then Olingah said, "That's the end, thank you." The guests clapped and the children went out to the kitchen to bring the food from the kitchen for everyone to have dinner together, while the adults started to talk amongst themselves about the presentation. "Good job, Ollie and Skye," said Leezah to her siblings in the kitchen as they high-fived each other. "Too bad Nurse Sangeeta missed it all." The children helped Romy and Flip serve the guests before sitting down to eat. They had just finished their meal and cleared the dishes into the kitchen when the phone by the fridge started to ring. "Hello, Olingah Fitzgerald speaking," Olingah answered the phone. Leezah and Skye listened to Ollie's half of the phone call and tried to guess what was being said on the other end. "Oh no! If you reached the sandy track, you went way too far," cried Ollie. "Oh no! Yes! No! Go back on that road, yes! We'll wait by the gate." Olingah raised his eyebrows at his sisters, as if to say, "Won't we?" And his sisters nodded vigorously. "Yes, okay," Olingah laughed. "Okay, see you soon." He hung up the phone. Nurse Sangeeta had missed the house, and ended up on the road to Choppy's Point. Chapter 8. Another visit to the temple. When Sangeeta and her husband and daughter arrived at Fellowship Farm, the other guests were just getting into their cars to go home. The Fitzgeralds were all out the front of the house saying goodbye. Sangeeta stepped out of the car apologizing over and over again. As she helped her daughter out of her car seat, Sangeeta explained that they had missed the farm and gone all the way to Choppy's Point. Then they had turned around and gone all the way back into town to use the phone box. They had wanted to stop at one of the farms to make the phone call, but Sangeeta and her husband were terrified of dogs, and they didn't want to get out in a place they didn't know, in the dark, in case there were dogs. "Never mind," said Romy, welcoming the family through the gate. "Come on in. There's still plenty of dinner left. We are so glad you made it eventually." Sangeeta introduced her husband, Roger. He seemed quiet and shy next to Sangeeta's exuberance. His pale skin, blonde hair and beard, his slender build and his plain clothes made him seem like a ghost compared to Sangeeta's rich, dark color, full figure and bright dress and jewelry. "This is our little one, Ashwini. We call her Winnie," she added, bumping Ashwini higher up to her plump hip. Ashwini snuggled her face into her mother's shoulder and clutched more tightly around her neck. The two families went into the farmhouse. Once Sangeeta and her family had helped themselves to some food and were comfortable, the children offered to do their presentation once again. "Oh, would you?" exclaimed Sangeeta. "We would so love to see it." Skye rewound the tape and they prepared their costumes and props once more. Even before the first song had finished, Sangeeta had tears running down her cheeks, and her tears didn't stop. As the children pretended to enter the temple and sang their prayer, Sangeeta's tears flowed like rivers, making wet patches on her dress and dropping onto her plate of food. As they finished their presentation, she pulled 2 or 3 tissues from her purse and quietly blew her nose. "Thank you. That's the end," said Olingah. Roger was not as emotional as Sangeeta, but he was obviously moved by the presentation and thanked the children very much. "Sangeeta and I visited the Lotus Temple a few years ago," he added. Sangeeta had lots of questions. Some of the questions the children could answer. Others they had to leave to Flip and Romy. As the conversation got more involved, Leezah, Skye and Olingah turned their attention to Ashwini. They brought out some toys and tried to make her feel comfortable. Quite quickly she came to trust them. And soon all 4 of them were playing together on the living room floor while the adults sipped tea. It was the second cup of tea for Flip and Romy that evening. After a little while, Ashwini lost interest in the toys and crawled up onto her father's lap. When she fell asleep, he laid her on the couch and returned to the discussion. It was also well past Leezah, Skye and Olingah's bedtime, but they were more than happy to stay up late. They tried to be quiet so as not to remind the adults that they were still up. They lay on the carpet drawing quietly and listening to the adults' conversation and laughter. Flip liked to illustrate his points with humorous stories from his own experiences and misfortunes, and this often made the firesides quite funny. As time passed, the fun of being able to stay up late wore off, and eventually there were 3 sleeping children surrounded by paper and felt pens on the living room floor. They didn't even notice when Flip led them into bed one by one at 1:45 in the morning. Chapter 9. Back to Work. It was a sleepy Fitzgerald family that gathered for prayers early the next morning. Despite the late night, there was no chance to sleep in. Olingah's visit to the hospital had slowed down the haymaking, and Romy had missed 2 days of work at the surgery, so they needed to catch up. As Flip reached for the guitar, he let out a big yawn and said, "Well, I'd just like to say a big thank you to that black snake out there at Crazer Creek." The creek running through the hay paddocks was called Crazer Creek. It was named after Dogma Crazer, who had taught the Baha'i faith to Romy's parents many years ago. "Because that snake just doubled our community." Suddenly the sleepiness evaporated. Leezah, Olingah and Skye let out a big shriek. Yay! Sangeeta, Roger and Ashwini had joined the Baha'i community. "Let's go see if you can get bitten again, brother," suggested Skye, laughing. "I've had my turn," replied Olingah. "This time we'll get the snake to bite you." Olingah suddenly struck at Skye with 2 fingers and poked them into her ribs, tickling her. "Oh, come on, Olingah," joked Leezah. "Until a being setteth his foot in the plain of sacrifice, he is bereft of every favour and grace." She quoted a passage that she had learnt at children's class that year. "Well, you can have all that favour and grace," replied Olingah, attacking her too with his 2-finger snake. All righty, laughed Romy. "Could we get that snake of yours to have some reverence, please? It's time to feed our souls some breakfast." After the spiritual breakfast, during physical breakfast, Olingah suddenly remembered the treehouse that they had been planning to build. Flip suggested that the children help out with the haymaking for the day, and tomorrow, on Sunday, they could all spend some time on the treehouse. Olingah grimaced, remembering what had happened last time they made a similar deal. Romy went into the surgery for the morning to attend to the sick animals that she had not had time to see during the week. Then, in the afternoon, she joined the rest of the family out in the hay paddocks. She brought the hard-working team a big picnic lunch, and they found a shady spot under the trees at the edge of the paddock to eat. Romy had brought a bottle of pineapple juice out of the freezer. Leezah rolled the icy bottle across her forehead before sticking it up the back of Skye's shirt and making her squeal. Romy had visited the bakery before coming home, so there were fresh cheese and bacon rolls for everyone, filled with salad and salami. There were plums and peaches from the trees beside the house, and as a very special treat, custard tarts. With the sun blaring down on the large paddock of freshly cut hay, and their tummies full and bursting, nobody wanted to go back to work. But the work could not wait. The weather had been fair so far, but if it suddenly rained, the hay would need days to dry again. Romy took over from Flip driving the tractor, and Flip took over from the farmhand driving the ute. By the end of the day, another paddock full of hay had been baled and stored in the hay barn. 5 very, very tired Fitzgeralds tottered through the kitchen door of the farmhouse that evening. Their faces were covered in dried sweat and dust. Their arms were scratched and their hands covered in blisters. Their muscles ached. Indeed, it was the perfect time to fill up the spa bath in Flip and Romy's bathroom and have a big, bubbly spa. Leezah put the plug in, and Skye squirted some rose-scented bubble bath into the tub. Soon the bath was full of warm, bubbly water. Olingah pressed the button to turn on the jets of water, and the children slipped into the tub. Their scratched, bruised, and weary bodies were gently massaged by the jets, and the masses of bubbles were wonderful for making hair spikes, beards, and other silly things. While the children bathed, Flip and Romy heated up some frozen vegetable soup and made some toast ready for dinner. Then they joined the Santa Clauses in the spa bath. It was quite crowded with all of them in at once, but there was just enough room. Flip stretched out his long legs to the opposite side of the tub. He rested his head on the edge of the bath and within a few minutes was fast asleep amongst a pillow of bubbles. He woke up 20 minutes later to the screechy sound of the bathwater swirling down the plug hole. The children dried off, pulled on their pajamas, and sat up at the table for dinner. Olingah rested his head on his hand, with his elbow propped up on the table while he ate, but no one objected. Nor did anyone object to going to bed straight after prayers that night. By 8:30, the outside lights were on, the doors were locked, and the Fitzgeralds of Fellowship Farm were all fast asleep. Chapter 10, From Plan to Reality. The next morning, Flip and the children went up to the shed where the farm dogs were tied up and the tractors and tools were stored. The puppies joined them, running alongside and in front of the children and constantly tripping them up. In the shed, they soon found some of the solid planks of wood and some bits of corrugated iron for the roof of the treehouse. Flip pulled them all down from where they were being stored, and the children got to work sawing and hammering with Flip's guidance until a solid floor had been put together. They lifted the floor onto the back of the ute and piled the rest of the timber, the sheets of corrugated iron, the tools, the boxes of nails, and 2 strong ropes on top. Flip drove down the hill from the shed towards the farmhouse. But just before the house, he turned right. Olingah jumped off the back of the ute to open the gate, and Flip drove through and across the creek. Olingah shut the gate behind them and jumped back up. Flip drove the ute up the long hill to the apple orchard. As he drove carefully between the trees, the children had to bob down behind the cabin of the ute so as to not get knocked by the branches of the old trees. When they found the tree that Leezah had discovered the week before, they swung the ropes over the higher branches and then attached them to the floor so that they could hoist it up. Once the floor was in place and had been nailed to the branches, the team got to work creating the walls and the roof. They took their time and made sure everything was done properly, but by the end of the day, they had finished. Flip hammered some pieces of wood into the trunk of the tree to make a kind of ladder going up to the treehouse. As the children waited by the side of the tree for Flip to finish the ladder, they could hardly stand still. Their eyes were bright with excitement, and their hearts were bursting with pride and happiness as they looked at the fruit of their hard work. Their very own little house. When the last step was in place, they lined up to climb into their new house. The ladder was sturdy and strong. One by one, they climbed up and went inside. The windows didn't have panes yet, and the doorway still lacked a door, but other than that, it was perfect. There was enough room for the 3 of them to be inside at once and sit quite comfortably. They hoped that Ashwini would be able to join them there to play as she got older. "It's just great!" exclaimed Leezah, climbing back down to Flip and wrapping her arms around his waist. "Thank you so much, Daddy!" As they drove back down to the farmhouse, the children discussed their new house. They decided not to paint it, because unpainted, it blended in well with the trees. But they definitely wanted a door and window panes and curtains and maybe a little piece of carpet for the floor. They thought some cushions would be good and a little shelf to keep things on. Only a week ago, when their cousins had left, the summer holidays seemed to stretch out depressingly before them. Now it seemed that there was not enough time to do all the things they wanted before school started again. Romy helped them find bits and pieces they needed to make their treehouse into a tree home. With some plywood, they made a light door and attached it with some hinges. And she helped them make some window panes using a wooden frame and thick plastic for glass. No one in their family was much good at sewing, so the curtains would have to wait. But as it turned out, they didn't need to wait long at all. On the 18th of January, Sangeeta, Roger and Ashwini joined the Fitzgeralds for their very first 19-day feast. Romy had called Auntie Ray to let her know that they wouldn't be over to the neighbouring community for feast that month, as their community had grown. Leezah and Skye explained the 3 parts of the feast to Sangeeta and Roger. After the spiritual and administrative parts of the feast, the Kellyton Baha'i community combined the social part of the feast with dinner together. The children talked about the treehouse that they had just finished making. When Sangeeta heard that the only thing missing was curtains, she was very happy. "I love to sew," she said. "Just give me the measurements and I will make some beautiful curtains for your house." "Thank you," said Olingah, Skye and Leezah together. "When you are a bit bigger," they smiled to Ashwini, "you will be able to come and play in the Baha'i treehouse too, Winnie." Winnie didn't seem too excited at the prospect. She was rather preoccupied with seeing how many grapes she could fit in her little mouth at once. After dinner, the Fitzgerald family walked Sangeeta, Roger and Winnie out to their car. Winnie smiled at Leezah, Skye and Olingah and waved her chubby hand out the window. "Bye-bye, Baha'i! Bye-bye, Baha'i!" she gurgled as the car pulled away from the house. Leezah, Skye and Olingah laughed and waved back. "Bye-bye, Baha'i!"